This is the story about this one particular guy, Canton Groove, and his speed run beat it on the even higher one, just because it was an opportunity and he couldn't pass it up. So he put it together to do this, and it was during this flooding in 1983, intense water eating through the cement and down into the sandstone.
Oh.
In one of the spillways, and you could look out and you'd see chunks of debris coming out, and the water wasn't clear, it was muddy, and it was starting to erode under the dam. So it was incredibly it was incredibly serious, the whole thing, because basically they had not anticipated the combination of an incredible snowpack and then warm spring rains that were just increasing the melting, and the inflow of the water was more than they could release. So at one point Glen Canyon was rising, and this is over 200,000 square miles of area, was rising 3 inches a day.
Wow.
Which was phenomenal. They were scared out of their shorts.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to let anybody know, and as far east as you got, the stories were that Grand Canyon was flooding. People were thinking that it rose up over the canyon walls a mile above.
The south rim and the north rim.
No, that was what was going on in the east. People thought that it was flooding Arizona because it was, out of its
I
banks.
just have a question. Was that
Sure.
the same year that, Sheriff's Reservoir blew out and all of that? Was that the same year?
I'm not sure because I'm not familiar with
The same thing. It was like
with what happened
we had
there.
up to second wire May 8th, and then on May 9th
Yeah.
it was 80 degrees.
Yeah, and it just started melting.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was the same year or not. But we had a lot of snow that year.
Yeah.
The year is
83.
Yeah,
It was?
Winter of 83.
Yeah.
It snowed a lot, they said in the
Yeah,
spring.
and then it started raining.
Yeah, then it rained and it just,
Yeah, Chris.
One of the things that really brings it into perspective for me is when, and is it true that Lake Powell has more shoreline than the western U.S.?
yeah.
That's a visual.
That's
There
good.
you
Really
go.
makes you got 3 inches coming up on that. That's freaking
Because you've got
huge.
so many
Every day.
canyons.
I
that
know.
you're
Yeah.
breathing.
There's so many things. that
Yeah,
sorry to
if you,
interrupt, but
if, no, that's a good point. And if it is, it's so hard to comprehend. And I have videos of the water. I have some friends who did a little video of it, and it shows you that. And this is for the advanced class, if you all decide to come to that one. And shows the one boat, the Tour West boat that the passenger died. It shows the Tour West boat entering and just getting beaten up. It is one of the most. I'm getting goosebumps now just thinking about it.
Yeah.
It was, and one of the interesting things about water and flash flooding is that when you double the volume of water, you cube the carrying power. So it's 9 times
See if that's
stronger.
the flow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
the
flow.
flow.
That's why flash floods in Arizona will pick up cars.
Yeah.
They're going, wow, it was only, 3 foot deep, but it's just so powerful. And that is one of the dynamics that, makes it so terrifying and also makes it so exciting, to be able to, when we would do trips, you would get to a point where you would feel the water underneath you, and, suddenly there would be something, a wave would come out from nowhere, and you go, oh, gee, man, we're not in charge. We're just here, man. We're just praying that we can get through.
And then when you had that flow increase, you would have dynamics like what he's talking about in back eddies. We call them like suck holes. They literally, like a water pressure, like a bubbler coming up and exploding and then going and just literally dropping back down. And if you were rowing a boat, your whole tip you sideways. So you got through the rapid and then you get stuck in a back eddy and flip.
Yeah.
That's the potential is there. I mean, the dynamic of water is just unbelievably interesting and exciting.
So anyway, back to Kenton. So he decided he applied to the park to do a run to test the that in an emergency, how fast you could get through the canyon unmotorized. So he was trying to get the park to be able to authorize this as in terms of a scientific investigation.
Sure.
So basically, what was happening was everybody was losing their minds at the dam. The Park Service, at the same time, was having all these accidents happening, and then the fatality. So they were going crazy up there, and basically, Martin Litton, who was the owner of the Dories, called the director of the Park Service and asked him about them doing this trip. And the Park Service, the guy was so busy, he said, "I'll call you back," and hung up. And so he got so involved, he forgot to call back because it was obvious that he didn't want him to do it, but he just forgot. And so Kenton is waiting in the warehouse in Hurricane, Utah, looking at the clock, and and then they decide to go down to the river. And one of the interesting things that happened was, then he did the speed run, and then he flipped in Crystal. He had 2 other boatmen with him, and left it. It was close to, I think it was 11 o'clock, I was
Leslie's Ferry.
Yeah, I was at the ferry that night when he left because my trip had been canceled that day.
Huh.
So I couldn't leave. And I had all my meat, all my ice. My boat was parked, ready to go.
Yeah.
So we had to take it all apart. But anyway, Kenton put on at midnight on a full moon and was able to break the speed record. And then it goes through the whole rapid after rapid. And, I think it was 36 hours, I think was what it ended up being. So
Really?
it was just and you're rowing, once you get down on the lake, there's still some current to a point, and then you're just rowing on flat water. So at the very end, they're just like rowing out here on the lake. And it had been after a day and a half of nonstop. Plus they flipped. It was just an incredible.
One guy got hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really bad.
He got
Yeah, real bad.
hit in the forehead. Yeah, he got
He
gashed
couldn't
pretty
really
good.
do much, right? It was just really
Well, he
Yeah.
continued on, and at the end, they were at the point of such exhaustion. It's just in terms of human endurance and just, it's an incredible story. And, it's this subculture that, if you haven't done any rafting, you're not really familiar with it at all. It's like people that ski every year, and work as drive a taxi, and you're going, how could you do that? It's the same thing with river guides. When I started, I was making $35 a day as a guide. And then after 22 years of experience, I was making $100 a day. And they started at $495 for a 7-day trip.
Yeah.
It was $2,000, or more, depending on the trip at the end.
Yeah.
So, and it was white slavery, we loved it. We just,
You're like, I get to do it again.
oh, it was, that was exactly our thoughts, and I stayed, and then I met Margaret, I can't remember, it's such a, yeah.
What? That should be a date.
Oh, that's a deal breaker. You know how you hate those? I met Margaret when we were out.
1983, October 12th.
Nice recovery.
Oh, very good.
Yes. 4:30, she walked into the house. And she has a degree in ceramic arts and was working in Mesa at a, what would you tell them?
I was working at an art center, Mesa Cultural Program was called, and I ran all of the pottery classes from hand building to glaze calculation, and it was originally part of the Parks and Recreation, and then we were able to expand and add more classes, and it became a fine arts program run by the city. And now it's like unbelievable in Mesa. You could look it up. We visited there a few years ago, and it was like, oh my gosh. But I was one of the first people there It's just at the right time,
Yeah.
and we
Did you
had
have a
wonderful.
background in ceramics?
Yeah, I have a degree.
Okay, yeah,
I had an art degree with an emphasis in working with clay and metal.
okay.
And when I got out of college, I went to University of Illinois. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I didn't have an education degree. And when I moved to Arizona,
Right.
I saw that there was an opening at a Parks and Recreation, and they had a little tiny electric wheel, a beautiful facility with this beautiful old grade school. It's still there.
Cool.
The Irving School, and now it's the the administrative part of the school district, and a whole new art center. But that was in let me think what it was, 76. Yes, 76, 77, somewhere around there. And I taught at this art center, and I had a great budget, and I was able to expand it to 12 wheels, and we had classes with ASU and U of A, and building kilns and doing things like that. So I had been there for almost 12 years.
Oh, wow.
And had hiked Grand Canyon, had never done any river trips, but it was something that, it sounds funny, but when I was a little kid, I used to dream about being in a little boat, like in The Wind in the Willows or something, you know, and that was something in my consciousness. And I loved rocks. I loved fossils. I loved any kind of geologic formation, and I grew up in central Illinois. So I would lie in the gravel of our family farm when they get a new load of limestone and look for fossils. So those kinds of interests in my brain when Michael and I met, and other, commonalities, and we were from the same area. We grew up 10 miles, 12 miles apart, but we didn't know each other. We met in Arizona, but we knew other people that knew each other. And so I went to, in 1984, I went to, my sister Amy was going to Arizona State, and she had gone on a river trip of Michael's private permit, because she knew his younger brother, so they had done a private trip the year before.
Mm-hmm.
And I took her down to Tucson for the slide party. That's before you had your camera on your phone, and you could instantly post everything you did in your whole life. You actually took photographs and slides and had slide parties. And that's when I met Michael. And 2 years later, he invited me on a river trip. And a year and a half after that, I asked Bill Diamond, who was the owner of the company, if he would consider hiring me. And he did. And then I was a guide for 12 years. And we were able to work mostly together, which was pretty nice.
Did they have other females?
The three Diamond daughters.
At the time, it was a totally male-dominated
Okay, yeah.
subculture,
Were
and
you one of the first ones?
women were looked at as
We. They couldn't do it.
Well, Bill Diamond didn't think women could read whitewater.
Yeah, right.
Well, I'll read
It was a
whitewater,
genetic
and
defect.
also just the hardships of being a guy.
Right.
Yeah, I'm a
And the
female, I can
problem
do that.
was Bill Diamond had 3 daughters, and go ahead.
And they were trailblazers.
Yeah.
Were you the first one to be female?
Maybe outside of
She
the
was
daughters.
well, Margaret was one of the first handful, and I would say less than 10 women, that not only rode in Grand Canyon, but drove a 37-foot motorboat
Oh, wow.
with a motor
Oh, wow.
Wow.
and negotiated the rocks.
Ugh.
And that is one of the most incredible things.
Yeah.
And that is why she's such a badass.
Yay!
Yeah.
And I have one other, let me just say one other thing. When
It was an honor to be down there.
I bet.
It was so exciting and so wonderful and so magnificent.
What years were you there then?
86 was I was hired as a guide in 86. My first trip was in 85, and I worked for 12 years.
Okay. And when did you start?
1977.
He had 10 years on me before I ever started.
What brought you to the river?
When I was going to college, I graduated from high school in 1968, I went to Western Illinois. We grew up in Central Illinois. And I was paying my way through school, so I became a resident assistant in the dorm, in charge of the floor, and they give you your room and board. And one of the other resident assistants told me stories about doing river trips in Utah and taking people on their vacation and hiking and rowing boats and cooking for them. And I thought, God, that sounds cool. Just, initially, I mean, what, you think you're going on vacation with this. So I went through the college and I graduated in '68, and then I went into the Army for 3 years, and I was in ROTC, so I was an infantry platoon leader, airborne rangers, and ended up not having to go to Vietnam. My orders were taken away when they signed the disarmament. But anyway, I decided after I got out, I was pretty disillusioned because I grew up in the 60s. I was just a hippie. I didn't really want to get a job, and I was sick and tired of the military. So I came out west, and I thought, I'm going to try to get a job. And I wrote my friend, and he sent a recommendation to Ted Hatch. It was Hatch River Expeditions that work out of Utah. Yes, sir.
You started East Ferry and take it all the way out to the other end?
Yes.
Always? Or did you stop at Phantom Ranch?
No, we would do both. We would do changeovers
In Phantom?
at Phantom. That was because it was affordable for people, and obviously people don't have that much time that have children and jobs. So we would do a lot of changeovers.
Because I plan a trip, and I think...
Yeah, you were talking about that earlier.
And I think Phantom is about as far as I want to go. We got up to hiking up and out.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I'm not sure, but sometimes if you plan enough ahead, if you don't want to hike out, you can take a mule.
Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta get down the range and go ahead. A little mule down there. Yeah. So anyway, I don't even remember what we were talking about there.
Oh, it's sort of how'd you finally get to the river? How did that become part of your life?
Oh, that's right.
Right, yeah.
So anyway, I came out west, wrote Ted Hatch a letter, and he told me that I had to get my advanced first aid and a boatman's apprentice license. I went to Salt Lake to get the apprentice license, lied about everything. My experience.
Oh, yeah, I've been lots of
One of the ones was the Panther River, which was a creek that ran through the golf course. I had 20 trips. And the boatman's exam was simply a flat water lake exam where at night, what color light do you have to have? There was nothing about white water.
Right.
It was really kind of a... What? Okay. But anyway, so I got my apprentice license, and he hired me the next year. And I was working in Vernal, Utah at the time, and there were two brothers, Ted and Don Hatch, and they ran rivers in Idaho, in Utah, and in Grand Canyon.
Oh, wow.
So we could go to Idaho, and he had a plane. So we would fly to Idaho, run the salmon, or the main or the middle fork of the salmon, or the Selway, and then sometimes fly to Grand Canyon and do a river trip down there.
Wow, you were living the life.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was in heaven.
VIP.
Anyway, when I got this job, I told my two brothers, you got to come out here and check this out. You're not going to believe it. And my two best friends that I went to high school with, and they all became river guides.
Did they?
Oh, wow.
God.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Quite the...
they all came out.
Did they lie about all their stuff too?
They didn't have to, no.
Yeah. Oh, you vouched for him, Albert.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, this
Yeah.
is my
Oh, yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know whether they didn't have to, because they didn't work in Utah. They all worked in Grand Canyon.
Oh, okay.
So at the time, and then the first year I worked for Ted, he and his brother split up the company. His older brother, Don, took Utah and Idaho.
Ah.
Ted Hatch took Grand Canyon. And so you had to decide what you wanted to do. Grand Canyon was a longer trip, and it was Grand Canyon. You know, I mean, every single canyon that you go down is such an incredible experience. People go, well, where should I do a river trip? And I go, anywhere you can. even if it's a float, you know, you're on the water, letting this water float you along, and you're seeing some areas that people have never seen or can't get to any other way. So it's just the most incredible thing. And so I was hooked, and I stayed around because I wanted to buy a company. I had 3 different situations where I made offers on 3 different companies, and on 2 of them, somebody came out of the, woodwork with a lot of money and just took it over. And the last one, it was just a whole family dynamic where they ended up, the guy I was working for had spoiled all his kids and said, I know if I give the company to these guys, are going to run it in the ground. And that is unfortunately what ended up happening, but they kept the company and the family, of course. But anyway, that's why I hung around, and so that's how I came to Grand Canyon. Yes.
How long was it before you could actually go down the river at that same time as in 1983? Your trip was canceled?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the situation. What was happening was, you're aware of the whole Lake Powell rising and critically, and then they started spilling the water out of each of the spillways because the water was rising so fast they couldn't let out enough water, and it was getting close to overtopping the dam. I mean, they actually put plywood up on the top to prevent the water from coming over.
Well, the pressure behind the dam is less than the eroding effect of it that tops, and then you've got like a hydro drill eating away. That's why once something tops a dam in Mother Nature, it may, like the lava dam that was built by Mother Nature in the lava flows 1 million years ago, and that's the site of lava falls. Lava flows blocked the canyon completely. Did you say that already?
No.
And as a result of that, for how many thousands of years, that dam created a big lake. And it wasn't until that lake topped that, how high was that? 400 feet?
At least.
Well, the lava
feet
made it.
high
400 feet?
of lava that blocked blocked the Colorado River.
Really?
And as soon as that lake rose up enough over centuries
Yeah, it took
or whatever, and topped it, it took, they think, less than 48 hours
Yeah.
to eat that away.
Right, just eat it away and make
And
it
that's
channel.
what created over a period of time and through, eons, 1 million years later, that is the biggest drop in North America, lava falls. It's called a falls because of the drop per distance. It drops 37 feet in 130 yards. So it's very volatile, very variable. When the flows change, you have a run on both sides of the river, but most of the time your only choice is through hell and back.
Right, just go through the middle and run.
Down the right side, because there's
Oh.
a huge ledge
Oh,
that is doing the same thing it did 1 million years ago,
oh.
catching water and doing
And
this,
doing-
and you get
putting
caught
it in
in there
recycle.
and it can kill you.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's not good.
No,
it has.
but I mean, go ahead.
No,
But that dynamic of water.
Anybody else have
I
questions?
didn't hear how long before you could actually go.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's right. We were running it all the while as
They
the
didn't
water was
stop?
coming up.
Oh, so you got to go the next day?
Well, on our trip.
Yeah.
Well, my particular trip was canceled, so yeah, people launched that next day. Well, what happened was, here's the situation. They had the fatality at Crystal,
Yeah.
and there was and the Park Service was freaking because they were going to get all this negative publicity that they had to do something positive. And the thing of it was is that they didn't realize, well, it happened in Crystal, and they realized that if they didn't get someone, or if they didn't get control of it, it would just, turn into a panic or, so much bad publicity. So what they decided to do was, and they didn't know for sure whether the rapid had now turned into an unrunnable rapid, where no matter what you did, you were gonna get sucked in and flipped, because several boats turned over.
So you
After
evaluate the
that.
whole thing.
Yeah.
So what happened was that morning, we were coming down to the river to leave on our trip, and there was a sign at the top where you turn onto the road to go down is all guides report to the what's the ranger station before you launch. And so we pulled in, all these people are there, the superintendent of the park is in there, and he goes, we're gonna shut Grand Canyon down for 24 hours to try to figure out what's gonna go on here, whether we can allow trips to go through Crystal or not, because we don't know firsthand here. And the fact that someone has died has suddenly, amplified this situation. And we don't have the information that we need right now because we don't have anybody on the ground.
Huh.
So basically, what they did was so we're standing there with our mouths open, and I had just gotten off the river a few days before, and everybody knew that there was a run. And I wish I would have I've got a map of Crystal and it shows you, but anyway, what happens is it goes around a corner like this and then turns to the right, and what happens is all that water, because of centrifugal force, wants to go to the left, and right on the left hand side is this huge hole, and there are pictures here that will show you. Yeah, that one right there.
Wow.
And
Can everyone see this over here?
that's where
Yeah, the
that's
left
where
side of
they
the river is
flipped.
basically a granite wall.
It's just centrifugal force, basically, and it just wants to take you there. And what you gotta do is you've gotta get as far right as you can. And the whole right side is rocks, except that in high water like that, it was all underwater.
So it was
So
just-
there were tamarisk trees
Oh.
that were along the river. So all you had to do is when you got off, you scouted on the right, you got down in your boat, you drove out, and then you drove into those tamis all the way down. And that was the run. And what we would do, and it talks about it in the book, it's called a turnaround run. The motor's in the back, and when you're just driving, your weight is going to pull you this way. What you do is you turn around, you spin the boat around backwards.
Wow.
And that gives you the momentum to back into that current and get
The
out
motor
of
is
it.
in the back, now
And
the
then
front
you're
of the
just
boat.
standing,
Right.
you're out of that strong current that's moving this way, and then you're just idling down and driving backwards.
Make it sound like that.
Yeah, and then you eventually just move your motor over and turn your boat around.
Unless you hit a rock.
And then, well, see, the water was so high.
No, I
then.
was saying that when.
Oh, yeah, and then,
Generally.
yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Later.
Wow.
So that was the run, and we're standing there with this guy going, dude, there's a run. The guy didn't do it. He's stupid, and that's what really happened was this guy, and if you read in the book, he started in the middle of the rapid and was trying to drive diagonally across.
Wow.
Is this Kenton when he flipped it?
No, not Ken.
Not Kenton,
This
the
was
different
the motorboatman, the
Oh,
two
right.
last.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Oh, right,
one
right,
where
right.
somebody
When the
died.
person,
Yeah.
because he thought he would have enough momentum to go
Oh,
across.
to not get the,
To not realize how incredibly strong.
yeah.
Because your
And
motor is never strong enough for
And if
anything
you-
like that, it's just to help
No.
place
Oh,
you.
no.
we were driving these 2-ton motorboats with a 30-horse motor. And the same thing with the oars. I rode this at the same whitewater, and you got out of the current, you're on the right side, and you stayed on the bank. And you just rode, and then the current caught you and started to take you, and you just kept rowing
Kept going.
against the tamarisk all the way down. But what happened was, after that happened, the superintendent said, I'm closing it for 24 hours. We're gonna helicopter a ranger in at Crystal so that he can make sure that you walk all your passengers around.
Right, you can get out of the
And so
boat.
only the boatman
Oh,
and his assistant will run through,
okay.
so that they minimize any kind of an accident that can happen. Plus, when you take all that weight off your boat, depending on if it's an oar boat or a motorboat, you're making it a lot more maneuverable because you're
Yeah, yeah.
subtracting all that weight of the passengers. But you know, there was a run. So, you know, we couldn't do a thing except, you know, go out to the ferry and start de-rigging our boats. NBC News was there, and I think ABC News. I traded the NBC guy for his hat and for some beers. But we were so we were de-rigging the boat, and there was all this, you know, dynamics going on at the ferry. And then we got them all de-rigged, and it was dark, and we drank too much, so we ended up spending the night.
Right.
Did ABC and NBC stay with you and get drunk too?
No.
No, but that's when Kenton took off.
But there's a page in the book that talks
Yeah,
about
it is
sleeping on the
about it,
shore.
yeah.
Anyway, I was actually, the guy interviewed me about it. And they didn't air it, of course.
Huh.
But I had told them there's a run there, you know.
And that means what? There's a run there.
That means
It was
that
runnable.
you can
It
run
wasn't
means
very
that you can
running.
get through safely.
You could get
Okay,
through.
okay.
Yeah, too, yeah.
Either
You may
whether
not
you're
make
in
it
a
if you-
motorboat
but
or
yeah.
a motorboat, there's a run where you don't have to go through the hole.
Right, you know,
Okay.
don't
So
stare
that's
at
what
it.
they were saying, and the park didn't know that. You know, they didn't have a parks service person down there looking at it to see whether they could do it or not.
I see.
They weren't gonna take our word for it, because their ass was on the line.
Right,
Well-
they don't wanna keep losing
Yeah, right.
people.
If somebody had died the next day,
Yeah,
they
they'd be
would
like,
have
what's
just.
going on?
Oh, they,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah,
hey,
it would have been, you know, it had
it
been
would've
out of
been
control.
chaotic, yeah.
So anyway, so that was what happened. So we were down at the ferry that night, and I had heard through, you know, the grapevine that Kenton was talking about doing this, and I didn't think he could ever get permission from the park to do it.
He didn't.
You didn't.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, he
Yeah, he
tried.
did.
Tell anybody.
He tried.
So anyway, we're down there passed out, sleeping, and all of a sudden,
Commotion.
yeah, there was some people driving around on the ferry, and then somebody yelled, or not yelled, but I remembered that was possibility, so I got up, woke up my other friends, and we went down, helped them get the boat off, and the timekeeper was there. So we're standing there, you know, going, Jesus, man, this is insane.
Right.
He was so focused, he didn't hear a thing. You know, he was just getting his shit together to take
Wow.
off. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, and that was the timekeeper standing there going, okay, you know, and he
Yeah.
rose out and caught the current, and
Whew.
yeah, it was running 8 miles an hour then.
Did you think he would die? It
It's a
crossed
good
your mind.
chance.
It
There was
crossed your mind.
certainly a chance.
Yeah.
You know, of course, because
It's
that
a
water
wooden
at that
boat.
point, the thing of it is that it was so strong. I mean, we're talking about 90,000 CFS, cubic feet per second, and the highest the dam would let out when it was generating electricity was 25. So it was almost 4 times. And the parking lot at Lee's Ferry was flooded. It was up, you know, I mean, it
The
was.
ramps.
It was the ramp, yeah, where you put in.
Yep.
It goes way, you know, it starts here
Yeah,
and goes
it starts
down.
and goes back.
So he was able to do it, and it talks, you know, the second half of the book is him, you know, doing his river trip and then getting to the end and setting the record again.
Wow.
You know, which was, and Kevin Fidarco, his writing, you know, whether or not, it just is such a fascinating story about, you know, this young man whose obsession was, you know, Grand Canyon. You know,
Right.
that's all he lived for.
Well, don't you think it was his writing was pretty accurate?
Oh,
You said, well,
yeah.
I asked you that earlier, and you said no.
What do you mean?
About he didn't embellish things unnecessarily in his writing. Or did you think that? Because I think that's probably a question. I mean, what
Yeah.
kind of
No, there is, and
But there is-
I read the book again, and I bookmarked the front.
when you're down there, it's like when you know a subject and you see a
That's right.
movie,
Yeah.
you see a movie,
Yeah.
and they show it, and they go, oh man,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
That guy doesn't even know what he's talking about.
What's
But-
true and what,
but
you know,
he was-
everything gets blurry.
And,
You
well,
know.
that's the thing. The guy who wrote this book was a Dory boatman.
Oh,
He,
Oh, he was,
well,
yeah.
he was, and he wasn't a very good one. So
That's why he was writing.
So yeah, and he was a better writer.
Yeah, he wouldn't
Okay.
But he knew the subject.
But he knew
Yeah.
something.
Yes.
Yeah.
He knew it.
I think that's
And, it
important
is,
to know.
a person who is such a, well, and they sort of idolize this guy, this Kenton, and, like, I'll give you an example, like his nickname, the Factor.
Is what?
The Factor?
The factor.
Yeah, he wanted to be called the Factor.
Okay.
And what happened was he sort of gave himself the nickname because he thought he was.
Yeah.
And when we took some friends down, Bill and Tony Thompson, that live in Steamboat.
We didn't take him
Oh,
there.
I'm sorry, we didn't. They did a trip with the Factor.
The what?
We
They
got
did
to
a
know
trip with
them
Kenton
and
Brewer.
realized that they
Oh.
had done a trip
They
with
did a
him, a
dory
dory
trip.
trip with
Oh,
him.
nice, yeah.
They're clients
Yeah.
of mine.
They were. We managed properties, and tell them the story when she said that to you.
Oh, Tony. Well, she was talking about when I first started talking to her about whether or not she wanted to hire us, and it was we'd been recommended to really close friends, and I felt like I knew her already. Just a lovely, lovely person. She has this beautiful little, kind of a blind side face, and very strong, wonderful woman, ranching family from Wyoming. And she said, "Oh, Margaret, did you know the Factor?" And I'm going, Kenton? But I mean, is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about? And it was like, we never called him the Factor.
Oh, the
He
factor.
gave,
Okay.
he wanted his,
Because he wanted people to think
the boatman just kind of
that
said,
he was
"What?"
such a factor, and it was like I had a conversation with him. I did some trips, I did some science trips, and we'll talk about that. But I said to him, Ken, the Factor? What is that? When we're all down here
Yeah.
guiding,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we're all a factor.
Right.
We all have people that we're responsible for. You're not.
And
the
we're down
only-
here because we love Grand Canyon.
Yeah, you're not the only factor.
What does factor mean? I didn't.
Oh, no, that,
It means that whenever things happen, you're someone that makes a difference. You're a factor
Oh.
in everything that goes on in Grand Canyon.
Oh, God.
And when Tony and her husband Bill did the trip, he told people to call him the Factor
He did, yeah, they
Right.
didn't even know his real
instead of
name.
Kenton.
right, he did his name.
And I made a point. Kenton,
Yeah,
I would accent it.
Yeah.
Just because I.
But he was
dude,
also a passionate,
Yeah, I don't mean to, but that gives you an idea
Yeah.
of the size of his ego.
Right, the
Yeah.
guy.
And also, the dory boatmen, and I was going to get into this later, but in the beginning of the trips in the 70s, they really thought they were the bee's knees.
Yeah.
The
Right.
dories, well, obviously,
elite.
Right.
they were in love with their boats and the way they did it, and it got so bad, there was a real oars versus motors
Oh.
Yep.
rivalry and controversy. They wanted to turn Grand Canyon into a wilderness area and ban all motors.
Yeah.
So that was the big deal. This was in the late 80s. So dory boatmen, occasionally you would drive up to them on a trip, they'd be rowing along and they'd put buckets over their head. Now, isn't that professional?
To say that, that they didn't even want to look at the
I'm just-
motorboatman.
Right, yeah. They're,
Oh my
they're
God.
so far below.
So,
But I mean, it would have made Grand Canyon an elitist experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, that,
Right.
How do you justify that when
Right.
you? But
yeah.
again, you've got to
Well,
have a balance.
So, and what happened, interestingly enough, was during that high water, when we had those incredible dynamics of the whitewater, like the swirlies that would become whirlpools and suck a boat down. That's scary.
yeah.
Right.
And a current, you're rowing along, and a current comes out of nowhere and takes you over and slams you into the wall, and you've got nothing. You're out of control.
Oh, wow.
And there were a lot of times where motor boatmen, because we had motors, were able to help other people out, and
Right.
there were a lot of flips. And basically, there were a lot of people saved just because we happened to be in the right place at the right time.
We had a motor.
So after that, grudgingly, well, I don't really mean grudgingly, because a lot of them realized that, there's a place for both. And the fact that, the whole definition of a national park is for the most people to be able to enjoy this
Accessibility.
experience. Whether it be a motor trip or whether it be an oil trip. I had a guy on a motor trip. The first morning, we camped. We'd gotten on the river in the afternoon, had camped that night, and I'm standing up in the kitchen getting stuff ready, making coffee, and this guy comes up to me, and he's got tears coming down his face, and he said, "That's the first time I've ever seen the Milky Way." And he had grew up in Boston and had never
Seen.
and he gave me a big hug, and I'm sort of standing there, and then of course,
That's how sex.
that was the thing.
Yeah.
This experience was like having a mini encounter session
Yeah.
with all of these people, because everybody was reduced to the same level. Everybody had to stand in line to get lunch or dinner, stand in line to go to the bathroom. So, all these people that were CEOs of big companies were standing right behind the farmer,
Yeah.
and it was such a neat experience, and I was able to be in charge. And I didn't abuse that very often, I must tell you.
You never abused it.
One of the first trips I ever did in Grand Canyon, this guy, one of the passengers said, why do you guide here? What does this experience do to you? And the senior guide was talking, and then I was new. It was like my second year or something, and I said, this experience is like having a jewel box.
Having what?
Having a jewel box, jewelry box, and you open this jewelry box, and the more people enjoy the jewelry, the more you open it up. And there were times, and we would have passengers on a trip, and it's such an incredible experience. It's sensory overload. You're there for 4 days or 5 days or 7 or 8 or 12, but you're so overloaded with things that, you're just, and the whole experience of being in Grand Canyon, in the bottom of Grand Canyon in the summertime in Arizona. It's like going from hell to lower hell. The temperatures were incredible. And you're talking about like people, we would do changeovers, people that would hike in there. We would set up a tarp and set up a first aid station.
Electrolytes.
As the people were hiking out, we would have changeovers where people would do 4 days and then leave, and then we would have people hiking in, just like you were talking about. And so in the middle of the summer, these people were all heat exhausted. And in different states of,
And you guys didn't get that. You didn't have heat exhaustion.
Once in a while.
Once in a while, it was so extreme. But the beauty of it was we had this 60-degree Colorado River water
They can just dump it in
that
the
you
river.
could get into. And, I had a trip where this family was hiking in, and the patriarch was an 80-year-old dentist, and it was all his children, grandchildren, and they all hike in down to the bottom, and it's like 10 or 12 people, and no grandfather, so I'm waiting
He's
around.
there, but he's back in the trail.
So I take off up the trail.
Find them?
I found him, and he was in in this little patch of shade, just kind of hunkered over, and he was having knee problems.
Yep.
His knees were giving out because it's all this down pounding. I don't know if anybody's ever hiked in, but anyway, so I get him up, and I put his arm around my shoulder, and I start to walk, and it's like a step and then a stumble. So I found another spot of shade. I ran back down, went up to Phantom Ranch, grabbed a wheelbarrow, took it across the bridge, and went up there, got him in it, and loaded him up, and we went down
But
just,
not the boatman bridge, not where the boat.
just before anybody could see him. And I got him out and made sure he could walk, and then he walks across the bridge to applaud.
I hope he tipped you very well.
Oh. And so everybody was congratulating him. I snuck the wheelbarrow back.
Yeah, nobody needs to know that.
So anyway, that was the deal. It was such an incredible experience that, you know, we can't even begin to express it, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, people, you know, they had different degrees of experience there. Some people, as I was saying, some people got it. You know, you'd be talking and you'd be explaining the geology or something, and they would be nodding and understanding, or they would come up to you at night in camp and go, man, this is just, you know, I can't.
We want to borrow books out. We'd always take a
we
little
had
library.
libraries with
And
us.
that was why.
Yeah.
Because there's so much.
Yeah.
From the birds to the biology to the
To the
archaeology to the ornithology to the
Yeah, it was, we
botany.
Yeah.
Everything.
It was just the most incredible thing, and you know, it was the teaching aspect of it that both of us just endeared, and it was like, this place is so incredible. You can't believe it. I mean, it's just, you know, I get goosebumps, and I get tears in my eyes when I talk about
You were very lucky to have this, right?
Yeah.
it. And that's why we're still working in our 70s.
They didn't say the pay was high.
Yeah,
Who
good.
were some of the more famous people you were the river?
Bruce Babbitt.
Yeah, I took Bruce Babbitt down. We took Scott Pelley on a 48-hour trip.
Ooh.
Who's that?
Scott Pelley, he's the 60 Minutes
guy.
moderator.
He hiked.
He
was
hiked
going to
out.
hike out in topsiders.
He hiked out at Phantom Ranch and Topsiders.
Is that good
Yeah.
or not?
Oh no!
So we
I mean,
called him
you know,
Mr.
topsiders are.
Topsider, but-
Yeah, they're like a leather boat shoe.
Oh,
Like a leather boat, you know,
yeah.
Duck shoes.
deck shoe.
Oh,
Duck
oh,
shoes you'd wear on a
not
yacht
good.
or,
Yeah.
you know,
And you know, you'd have
They're very
blisters and
comfortable.
blood by the after.
That way, not.
they're comfortable, not for hiking, but.
Yeah. He
Um,
just didn't know any better.
We did a Marlboro commercial
Did you?
Oh,
for German cinema because you couldn't do commercials in the Americas anymore because they banned them. But Ridley Scott,
Tony Scott.
Tony Scott, was the director.
Ridley's
And it was
brother.
the end of the season, October, and I was doing the trip for oars, and they said, "Do you want to do a commercial? You got to run into you got to run into Lava Falls, which is 180 miles, and you got to do it in 5 days. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run Lava Falls
No,
to get it
rowing in. We're not on a motorboat. We're
oh,
rowing.
oh,
A run-in means you
Yeah,
go from A to B with no stops.
Yeah, anyway, so
until it's dark.
right, we go up there.
So, and they said, we're going to run Lava Falls for a German cigarette commercial,
Right.
and we'll have a helicopter there
Right.
to chop your boat down. You know, are you up to that? I go, sure, man. And this is October. It's really sort of the end of the regular season, so this was like a bonus trip, you know, so next to go. So I go, yeah, you know, I want to go, and I finagled Margaret on. So we get ready, we get down to the ferry, and they're going, oh, there's no helicopter.
What?
Yeah, that's what I said. I said, there's no helicopter. How are you going to get the boat?
I want to give you your.
Yeah, how do we
Thank
get
you.
out of this thing?
Thank you. And so they said, yeah, and it was because oars had no user days, which was how they give permits.
Yeah.
A person on the river is one user day. So each company is allotted so many days. And ours was out of them.
Oh,
So they really didn't have any, so the park was getting really kind of snarky at them, which was justified.
Yeah.
They were going to let them go, but they couldn't have a helicopter,
Right.
and all of the crew had to hike in at Lava Falls.
Except for the boatman
The boatman, yeah.
and for the television crew.
Right.
They had to hike in from Tule.
Camera crew.
Camera
So
crew.
anyway,
So they
we
were
get to the ferry, and we're standing around, and these two huge trucks pull up, and they start unloading equipment.
Right.
it's what?
Equipment, like these huge steamer trunks,
Right.
cameras, and then they start unloading metal pipe. you know, like 2-inch, they're gonna rig a scaffolding.
Right.
On oar boats that we have to row.
Like, we can have room
So,
for
me being the lowest man, I get the metal pipe on both sides of my boat. Everybody else is just pushing along, and I'm rowing.
Yeah, you're
My boat's so heavy. We were doing 35 miles a day. We were getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and leaving before dawn, and then rowing until nightfall. But anyway, we got down there, and so Tony Scott hiked in, and well, this is even better. We leave. We're waiting that afternoon because oars didn't have approval to go because they didn't have any days. So it's finally, you know, it's getting late. The leader of the trip says, we're leaving. You know, screw it. They were supposed to drive down and let us know. So we leave and we're floating down, and the Navajo Bridge, 5 miles down, goes across the river there. So we're rowing down, and the sun's already set, and all of a sudden there's a truck pulls out right in the middle of the bridge, and it's the manager of oars. And he goes, turn back! and the leader of the trip goes, fuck you! And it just echoed through the canyon.
Yeah, well, I guess we're not going back.
Yeah,
Yeah, what's he gonna do?
Row back upstream.
with the pipe.
Yeah, how are you gonna go back up?
Yeah, so we ended up, go ahead.
Just curious which half you recommend, because I do plan on doing it in the next year or two.
Which group?
Which half?
Which
East,
half?
Up here or lower?
Yeah, Phantom being in the middle.
The upper half is easier, less extreme rapids until you get down. What the deal is that as you get down toward Phantom Ranch, you get in what's called the inner gorge, where the rocks are much harder and resistant to erosion, so the canyon narrows down. You know, above there, when you've got sandstone and limestone,
Which side is more dynamic?
More
Which
open.
would you prefer to do if you only had? It's I know it's like a 13-day trip, the whole deal.
Yeah, well,
I want to do about half of it.
what I'm saying then is you enter in the inner gorge and you start in the biggest rapids, some of the biggest rapids you're going to encounter, and the rest of the trip. So that part of it is if you're up for the whitewater, you know, I'd say hike in at Phantom. You know, you're hiking in no matter how good a shape you're in. The next morning you're going to be walking like the living dead. You know, no matter how good, because you're stressed.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you're into the whitewater, and that's the second half is, I would say, a little bit better in terms of the whitewater and the hiking that you do.
Got it.
But the upper is beautiful too.
Yeah, but the upper is it's like degrees.
I knew you were gonna say which kid is better, right?
I started with Ted Hatch in Grand Canyon, and it was a motor company exclusively. We didn't do oar trips. Later on, when I moved to other companies like oars, that was all they did. So there was a huge difference. But in the beginning, you would usually always run out of ice, and you would always, I can remember a few trips where we had steaks the last night and open the cooler and there's no ice and the steaks are looking a little questionable. And so you wash them quickly and you char the shit out of them.
Right.
And we also
Rub them with salt.
one year Ted Hatch had a friend in Vernal that was raising buffalo, so he bought I don't know how many buffalo steaks. So we were eating buffalo, and you could not cut it. We had camp steaks, and they were so tough. It was impossible. And so we would have them the first night, and we eventually started cutting them up and then just frying them, and hoping that by the end of the trip people would forget about the first night's meal and it would be fine, you know. And it was, there were things that, and when we were cooking, we didn't cook with gas at the time. What we were doing was we would bring a 55-gallon drum downriver cut in half, and that was our fire pan. And in the beginning, when they closed Glen Canyon in the 60s, there was tons of driftwood.
Everywhere,
Every
every
back
back
eddy.
eddy.
Yep.
Every back eddy was piled high. So before we got ready to go to camp, half an hour or so, we would stop at a driftwood pile, load the front of your boat with driftwood, go down to camp, unload that 55-gallon drum, put rocks on either side and put this huge grate over the top, and then we would put on our buckets of water, because we would have a four bucket wash system. And these were the big, I forget how many gallon, but they were the big buckets. And then you'd pull those off, and then you would start your dinner, cook the Dutch ovens on top, and then if you were doing grilling, a lot of times it was hamburger, or, and you'd make spaghetti, things that were pretty easy to make. But occasionally you would be cooking dinner and have Dutch ovens on there, and your 55-gallon drums would tip over into the sand
Because the driftwood would burn
with your entire dinner. And so
Who wants a sandwich?
yeah. So, we had that occasionally, and so that was the beginning. And then eventually we ran out of driftwood because there were all these companies all cooking with driftwood. So we had to go, and basically a lot of the things that happened in Grand Canyon, the changes for the better, were the boatmen realizing this isn't going to work anymore. We got to figure something else out, like the human waste, which was also a critical thing, because before the dam, every spring you would get high flows from the runoff. Oftentimes it would average over 100,000 CFS, cubic feet per second, which would pick up all the sand beaches,
and clean them.
clean the sand, and then as the water dropped back down, they redeposit it. But then after the dam, there was never a flow. I would say the high flow was 25, but you had beaches that, it wouldn't even touch. They would come up on the shore there. So, and in the beginning, when river running first began in the late 60s and into the 70s, you were just given a shovel and toilet paper, just like in the old days, or when you're out camping, you go high and far. After a while, after a number of years, the most frequently, you look at a beach and you go, well, that's obviously where you want to put the Porto, it's secluded, but you go over there and there'd be toilet paper everywhere, and it was, it was so bad. I was like, man, we got to do something about this, because the beaches that are here are the beaches that are here. And we were making fires in the sand. And you know what that's like when you come up on a beach that's got,
Charcoal
fire,
everywhere.
charcoal all over. So that wasn't working either. So that's when we came up with the 55-gallon drums. And then we started using a ammo can, a 30 millimeter, and using plastic bags inside, and then and initially that was called the groover.
Yeah.
Because it left 2 grooves on your butt when you sat down on it. You had no toilet seat. And that's why it was called the groover.
Toilet seat was a
Yeah, they do.
amenity.
They do. And then we came up with the idea of putting a toilet seat on it, a modern technology. But then we were hauling our human waste out, and then we were urinating in the river. I mean, you didn't go up in camp, because you know what it smells like, when people are using an area, it's disgusting. So we started doing all these things because we realized that, hey, we're trying to bring people down here and show off this place. And, there's things that need to be addressed, because we weren't getting those high flows. And also, after the dam was built, they started doing what was called peaking power, which what it meant was, in the summertime, when the southern areas, the 7 basin states that use the Colorado River, when they're needing the most amount of electricity, like in California and Arizona, when they're turning on their air conditioners in the evening when they get home, and they need this peak demand, they were letting out as much water as they possibly could in order to satisfy the demand and make the most money they possibly could. They
You
really
can't
didn't
store
care.
hydroelectric energy.
They really didn't care about the impact that was downriver. You know, river trips. You know, what are they doing down there? That's stupid. So anyway, what would happen to us is we were down there on river trips. Is that depending on how far away you were from the dam, the water would start rising at different times of day based on the amount of flow and where you were. And it was just like clockwork. You knew, okay, I'm 60 miles downstream. This is a Friday. They're going to be letting water out tonight. You know, I knew I need to move my boats. If I'm on a sandy beach that's got a, you know, easy slope, I've got to move it somewhere where I've got deep water so my boat doesn't end up. I've awakened in the morning and my boat's been 10 or 15 feet from the water and nicely settled into the sand, you know, as the water drops out.
Or your inflatable boat is wandering around out in the back.
Yeah, as the water's rising in the middle of the night.
Wow.
Or your kitchen, you hear the pans, your buckets banging together as they're getting floating away because the water's gone up inadvertently, you know, and you're going, oh my God, you know. And so there was all of this dynamic that was going on where the dam was solely there as a dam to store water and to produce hydroelectric power. Well, finally, in the early 80s, we sued to make them be responsible for this riparian community that they'd established below Grand Canyon. So what they did was they began the first environmental impact statement that ever happened on a free-flowing river. So we were doing all these studies on Grand Canyon, and suddenly we were doing them year-round.
Wow. Sediment studies.
Yeah, flow studies.
Tell them about the satellite telemetry stations.
Yeah, we did that as well. Margaret and I did an 18-day trip where we put in satellite telemetry stations at different places in the canyon where it measured flow, temperature, pH,
dissolved oxygen,
conductivity and flow, and these were satellite telemetry. So, and we started out, and it was a one-boat trip, and they put all of this stuff on the boats. That the first night we got to camp, all our food boxes were underwater, ruined all of our food, and we were able to call out because we were close enough, and there were two planes. So they sent another boat down to replace all the food. Yeah. And so anyway, we went on and did that, and so we were doing trips year-round then, and we were taking scientists down, which was pretty much, instead of having passengers that you were constantly responsible for, the scientists were doing their own thing. And so we'd make breakfast, and then they'd go off, and we'd take off hiking, you know, or we'd make them lunch, and we had the whole day off. And we'd do big hikes, and that's some of these ruins, or some of these, that Anasazi Axe Head, and the Pots. We'd go up canyons that we could never hike before with passengers. You couldn't take them, you know, it was just too rough. There was no trail. You know, I went up a trail into Nankoweap, which was an old ruin site, and it was the way into the canyon. And that was where that axe head was. A friend of mine had told me about it, up near a spring. And it was about a 4-hour hike, so I was running, and instead of running the riverbed that was dry, I was up on the rims looking for ruins. And I'm looking at my watch, you know, I'm thinking, okay, I got this much time, I can only use half. I came on a ruin site, I've stepped inside, and there's a pot, the rim of a pot sticking out of the sand.
And you're not touching any of it, you know. You just...
So I'm looking down at it, you know, and I'm a little bit heat stricken from running in the middle of the day, and so I get out there and I start digging like a dog, and it's completely intact. I'm opening this half side, and then I'm going, and I'm just
bad boy.
Well, no. And so I'm doing that. Wait a minute, I'm still not there yet. So I pushed the dirt back on it, covered it up as much as I could, and I just took off running, and finally got to where I was supposed to go, and found that axe head, and that it's a yucca.
I thought it was an Ocotillo.
Oh, Katia, yeah. That's what it
What,
is.
how old was it, you think?
1,000 to 1,200 years.
Wow.
And it's, you know, and if you look at it closely, they etched the, the
And that's
place where it
schist.
nested. And that rock is schist, which is the hardest rock in Grand Canyon. It's the most dense, and it's down in the inner gorge. It's the hardest rock that is there. It's 1.9 to 2.2 billion years old before life
It's
on Earth.
metamorphosed debris. So if you had volcanic material and geologically how this has been ground down and ground out in sedimentation, okay? And then under the pressure of the mountain building era of uplift and down pressure, that is put under such incredible pressure. So it went from a sedimentary rock to a metamorphosed structure, meaning that it was changed. The sedimentation was the first change from, like say, volcanic rock, volcanic intrusion, lava rock. So it was ground down. Then it was under such intense pressure that it made it incredibly dense and hard into a metamorphic rock. It went from sedimentation, or went to a deposition, a deposit, and then to a igneous material. So it was originally igneous, went from igneous to sedimentation to metamorphosed. Does that make sense?
So when you guys guided down the river, were you spewing this kind of,
Oh yeah,
Yes.
man,
we were.
I can.
We love that part
I'm
of it.
like amazed at how much scientific knowledge, you know, that you
Well,
all have.
the evidence of that is all around you, and you can point it out. You see these incredible volcanic intrusions, these sills or dikes that have been shot up through a 300-foot wall of limestone. And that's pretty dramatic. It's a dark red or it's a shiny black. And you know that that's an igneous volcanic intrusion, or a sill or a dike. A sill is this way, like a windowsill, and a dike is an upright volcanic molten intrusion. Depending upon the material will then determine how slowly it cools, what material is in it. That's how asbestos is made.
I can tell you that in the Bronx, we never thought about that.
I didn't in Central Illinois either. But I mean, it was all there. The evidence of it was all there, and it was so incredibly beautiful and accessible, and it made it so much easier to understand and see.
Wow.
Does that
You had
make
to
sense?
describe it to the people because they had no idea what they were doing.
No. And I thought, wow. And so anyway, go ahead.
I forgot what we were talking
We're talking about the axe head.
Oh, what?
I digress.
No, that's good.
The axe head is made out of,
Oh, the axe head, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. So anyway, those were science trips, and those are still going on. But it allowed us to see areas that we weren't able to see otherwise, and just to, to have some really fun trips. And we actually, do you want to talk about that? The sea fossil?
you can talk about it.
Well, what happened so as far as the flow with the dam and the power and
Oh,
all
okay,
of that?
yeah, to get back to the high flows.
Yeah.
Okay, what
The
happened?
lawsuit is
The
where you
lawsuit
stopped.
happened, but then how did they, because they still needed to meet electricity demand.
Yeah, so what they did was they had to come to a compromise where they couldn't release that extreme amount of water just at will. So they had to have a program where they would let us know, and they just wouldn't turn it on indiscriminately, and it also didn't allow them to generate as much as they could. So it basically restricted their flows, based on what we had done when we sued them. You can't just flood all this stuff without having some responsibility for it. So that was the decision. And so
And that was the lawsuit about showing the detrimental handling. It's like, you have this resource, how are you handling it responsibly? Yeah, it's a dam, yeah, it's generating hydroelectric power that's needed, but can we do a better job of it? The up-ramping, the increase in the water let go, and the down-ramping of the pulling back of the water was then critically analyzed to see what happened here.
And not
And
as
it was
extreme.
really fascinating what they found.
Yeah,
you know, how
so
they,
the dam created all the riparians, so now they gotta be responsible for that.
Exactly,
Can't
exactly.
just act it when
And
you feel
and
like
what
it.
it was they couldn't do it as fast as they were doing it because, you know, that was what was the big thing, and just not even caring about what it. And then we did studies on them, and then we actually had simulated high flows in the years following where they would bring it up to 60,000 and big enough to pick up all the beaches again. And then we would, I was on beach surveys where we were surveying beaches, and determining the amount of sand that was there after the high flow.
and the mixture of the sand was
Oh,
different
it was
than the
amazing.
ancestral sand, because that sand that was redeposited was this light, fluffy sand that you'd see at the ocean that just eroded away again so easily. There was no stability to it.
Yeah.
To a certain point. So
So
it's really
anyway,
fascinating.
and they're still continuing this study in Grand Canyon about that. So that's what happened as a result. And then after that midsummer peak, it slowly started to come down. But I think, when did you run the first trip? 85?
85.
This is 2 years after. We were still running on 50,000.
My first trip, it was 57,000 cubic
We were still spilling it out of the spillway.
And crystal and lava and Hans, the three numbers, they're always rated a 10. In the west, the rating goes from 1 to 10. In the east, it's to 5, or is it to 6?
It's different. Smaller rivers
depends
have
on
a
the
class.
volume of water and how they're
Have a
classed.
class, but
Class 5 or
But
class 6.
when the water would rise up in Grand Canyon, most of the rapids are formed by side canyons, flash flooding, and bringing debris into the canyon, into the river itself. And you'll always have big fans, at side canyons. And when we had big flash floods, that was happening. And so there's a picture over here that I have of Margaret and I and another guy, and one of the canyons. We were at Havasu, and we were on a one-boat motor trip, and we got there late in the day, and I hiked the people up, and it was, the canyon was running clear, but we had noticed that it had been raining. You could, you see the clouds, even though you're in the canyon. And so anyway, I hiked them up, and I said, we're gonna be here for an hour and a half, and went back down to check the boat, and I got back there, and I just had an uneasy feeling that we probably shouldn't be here. And so I walked back up and started sending people back, saying, I don't feel good here, we're gonna go on down. I got up there, and our swamper, who is a guy who helps us, he's an assistant.
He's a trainee.
He's up there sleeping on in the shade, and I said, we're sending everybody down. If you see anybody, tell them to come back. I got up a little bit farther, and I come around a corner, and I see a wall of water coming down the canyon, and it's flash flooding. I turn around, and I run as fast as I can, and I get down to about 100 yards from the entrance to the mouth where it turns into the Colorado.
This is Havasu.
This is Havasu Canyon, where the Havasupai Indians live.
Yeah.
And I'm running along, and I look over, and my swamper is standing out in the middle of the river in the middle of the canyon, on this big boulder.
Platform rock.
And he had gotten swept away by the high flow.
Right.
And he had his sleeping pad with him, and was being tumbled, and it brought him back up to the surface, and he ran into this cliff, or this big expansive rock, and hit it, and was able to get up on top, and he was standing there looking like a drowned rat. And,
Lucky.
Yeah, let me get this, you can pass it around.
And that just happened so quickly.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah.
you probably heard of some of the, tragedies in the last
Yeah.
2 years in Grand Canyon of the flash
Where is
flooding
he?
and
Where?
Okay, he's standing right there.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
And that's where he was.
Yeah, see, this is the flow right here.
Ah.
And this is the cliffs on the other side.
Oh my God.
and then here's people on this side. So he was standing out here, and when he got there, the water was running over the top.
Wow.
And he stood there for 2 or 3 hours, and the water finally started going down because you can see the edge of the cliff or there. And then before long, another company came and was on the opposite side of the river. And we were able to rig a rope traverse to be able to get him off of there and get him out and back down. And so we went down and made camp.
Oh, God. That's everybody, all these people that hired on and, let's say, our city
Our
people.
trainees.
And no, not your trainees.
Oh,
but did
just
you have
passengers?
How'd they handle it?
They handled it well because we gave them the instructions and,
Said,
we
He had a rolled up Paco pad.
yeah.
So it had a
Getting out of
certain
there,
amount of air in it, you know.
In the middle of the river.
Yeah,
Well,
and
that's Havasu. I mean, it's a side canyon, just a huge.
it's drainage.
the day
I
I
wanna
was
be
there,
there.
it was like,
It's like
it had this turquoise
one of
water.
the favorite.
Yeah, that's what it is
stops
normally.
for passengers. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Travertine,
Oh, I've seen pictures of it.
and it's turquoise blue,
Yeah.
and it's gorgeous. And then we came upon it one time, flashlight. We in that period of time, we saw probably 100-year flash floods in a matter of 5 years.
Wow.
It's just that time of weather pattern or whatever. But what, of course, was flash flooding. Everything is then covered with mud.
Yeah, I was about to
Silt.
say.
And big trees, big cottonwood trees have been uprooted and thrown around. And you're just fortunate you weren't there when that happened. There could be 150 people up that canyon any given day by the middle of July.
So we would have emergencies, as you can imagine, taking people totally out of their environment.
Oh, yeah.
And putting them in a place that's so inhospitable in the middle of the summer. And it was literally like people, especially when they're city people, are in shock.
Oh, yeah.
It's so incredibly hot,
Right,
and it's so incredibly wet, and
Sandy.
and sandy, and
And then it's cold.
my
It's 50-degree water and you're freezing.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
the husband wanted to go to Grand Canyon, the wife wanted to go to Grand Cayman.
Right.
Wrong grant.
It
Yeah.
doesn't always go well, I'm sure.
But the thing that's so cool about it is that first you're cold, and you're warm, and you're grateful, and you're dry, and you're grateful, and you're fed, and you've been hungry, and it's like everything is so basic to your needs and your survival as a human being, and your comfort. Most people have never had to not been able to get out of the elements before.
Out of the rain.
Just to get out of the rain, just to get
Yeah.
out of,
You get soaked.
inclement weather that you, especially
And you have
going
a
through the
Yeah,
inner
it's,
gorge and the biggest rapids, and you're getting smacked.
It's
Oh.
funny you
What would
say
you
that.
say would be the best time to go there as far as weather?
I would always do it when we did privates, and a private trip is when you organize your own trip. It's not commercial where you hire guides or you're doing a trip with people that have a company. A private is when you have the experience and the equipment, or you can rent it to do your own trip. And so I would always prefer the spring, May or April, because the days are getting longer as opposed to the fall.
Right.
Midsummer it's hot, and it's also the height of the commercial season. Too many people.
Yeah, too many.
Every spot, because you row in, you're at a beautiful waterfall by yourself, and then suddenly 2 or 3 motorboats pull in, and there's 70 people, kind of inching their way around you to get up to the waterfall. So, I always like the spring, and the flowers are out, and we didn't have as much traffic then, and it was just, and the temperatures are more moderate then. Actually it's cold when you leave, and as you get lower into the canyon, then it's more survivable, I think.
Then you see snow on the red wall formation, and it's worth every bit of.
But what I was going to say about having accidents, the way that we were able to communicate with the outside world at the time was pretty primitive. At most, we were issued a small handheld radio with 10 AA batteries that you could possibly get in touch with the tour planes. At the time, they hadn't restricted them, so there were several tour plane avenues where they would fly over, mostly the deepest part of the canyon, just because that was the most dramatic. So it was down in the lower part of the canyon. So if you had a problem, oftentimes there was no really way to get any communication out. So what we would use is Army surplus signal mirrors.
Oh,
my
really?
SOS.
And the thing of it is these surplus mirrors have an aiming device.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
And I was showing Jane, I gave her a little one.
Neat.
Yeah. And what this is, what you do, and it's very simple. And if you go to an Army surplus store, they will usually have them. But you get to a point where you can see the sun coming down on your mirror, and you just put it up on your hand, and you'll see a mirror flash on your hand. And if you look through the aiming device, you'll see a tiny sun right where the sun is reflecting. And you take that and you just move it up in the air and you put it right on an airplane.
Huh.
And we would get airplanes at 35,000 feet.
You would?
It's flash.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Universal sign of
And
distress.
it's a mirror flash from Grand Canyon.
Ah.
And the pilot in the airplane generally will tell you, if you look out over your right, in the right side of your airplane, you're going to see Grand Canyon. And if you saw a mirror flash, and it's just like the blinding flash from a windshield, you know, where it just takes your hurts.
Yeah.
And it's coming from Grand Canyon. So
They knew.
they would notify the pilot. The pilot would call the air traffic controller, wherever he was talking to, either Vegas or LA or San Diego, tell him he'd seen a mirror flash. So then what they would do is they would in turn call the Park Service at the South Rim, tell them they think there's an emergency in Grand Canyon. And what they would do, and us on the river community then would tell every boat that we saw and where we were going that night. So that, and then they would just, everybody that you were in contact with.
Everybody that went by you.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what he would do then, and when he didn't know where it was, he would start at the top, below the dam, at Lee's Ferry, and fly. It's called Nap of the Earth, where he's down on the deck. And he would be 50 feet off the water, and then he would fly until somebody waved him over and told him where the accident was or what the problem was, and then he would go down and evacuate them out. And sometimes we spent the night, you know, with somebody who was injured because we just didn't get out. Yeah, we were in a place where we didn't see airplanes, you know, or, you know, whatever. So it wasn't just a walk in the park. You know.
What kind of harm happened to some of your people?
Quite often it was, you know, people, because it's a rocky canyon, stumbling, you know, not
Hiking.
Yeah,
They had more
hiking.
injuries hiking than.
ankles, twisting ankles or breaking ankles, you know, stepping down off a step, and you know, that was the predominant one. Occasionally a snake bite, but that was rare.
Yeah.
Heart attacks.
Yeah, a heart
That
attack.
would be a bad one to try to get out.
We had a lady that we thought had a appendicitis, lower right quadrant pain, you know, to touch. We brought a chopper in, she left, we got to Phantom Ranch, and her father was on the trip with her, and they talked on the phone, and she was constipated, and that was the problem. She wanted to hike back in, and the dad was so pissed, you know, he goes, no way, and he hikes out. Yeah, it was just
I bet she never lived that
But it
one
was
down.
better than being anything.
it was better than an
critical.
appendicitis.
Yeah.
True.
But
Well,
you
then
can,
a woman was on the inside pontoon going through a rapid and fell off and was taken under the boat and got seriously cut by the prop.
oh,
That'd be bad.
that'd be bad. So what'd you do with that one? I mean,
The same thing. We stayed where we were. We had the we actually had a satellite phone. We had a beacon that we set up and as a continuous thing up in the rocks. And the helicopter pilot, they're amazing, these guys, because they'll fly with hardly any visibility, and normally after a certain darkness, they can't do it. And this guy was pushing the envelope, and he got the signal. He was almost to us, and then an animal, we think, knocked the beacon out, because we were back and forth up and down to the boats. And then so they came in the next morning. But we had a couple doctors on the trip, so they had some pain medication, and they were okay. You know, they were competent to use it, but she was very, it was very painful. What?
Did she get cut very deeply?
Yeah, she did, but she recovered completely.
Well, what happened was actually I as soon as I knew someone was overboard, I shut the motor off. But what happened was, it is such a crazy thing, that I had just gotten this brand new motor that morning. A friend, the owner's son, had brought it to the ferry. I put it on, and we hadn't disconnected the reverse lock. You have to take that off so that you can pull your motor out, even no matter where you're at, whether you're neutral, forward, or reverse. So in order for the motor to stop turning, I had to put it into neutral, so the current was turning the blade on its own. So she got hit with just the prop just freewheeling. It wasn't
still sharp enough.
You know, and that's what happened. So, I was on an oars trip, and we were at Havasu again, and I was the harbor master, which means I'm the guy staying down by the boats, sleeping in the afternoon shade, while everybody else is off hiking. And they were up quite a ways up, and a guy broke his ankle hiking. They couldn't get any signals, so one of the boatmen came back down to the river and asked me if I would run to the village, because at the time I was a marathon runner. And so I ran to the village, and there's a doctor there that has a satellite phone. So I was able to find him and have him call out, and then as I'm running back down, I can see the chopper coming in to pick the guy up.
That was quick.
It was just one of those lucky.
And so I caught up with the rest of the guys, and we went on down and headed down the river.
Good thing they had you.
Well, that was another thing. That's why Kenton sort of respected me, because there were all these stories about Kenton running all these canyons in all these different times, and then suddenly they're going, "Oh, you broke his record." And I go, "What? What are you talking about, man?" So there were things that were beyond my control that were sort of happening around me, just because I enjoyed running trails.
But you do what you have to do.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, that cake is wonderful.
Yeah, that's a
great cake.
delicious,
Yeah.
you guys.
Well, this has been wonderful.